Hello and welcome back to online English class. I hope you guys are doing well today. Today is Tuesday, April 21st. Yesterday we finished up our conversations about OTN2, and you should be finishing up your work on OTN2 in your outline, structuring your central claim and all of your supporting assertions and evidence, and sending that to me by 3 p.m. today. Okay, to maximize the amount of time that you have to finish up that work, which should take you a substantial amount of time if you're doing it right, and hopefully you've broken it up over the course of multiple sittings so you don't have to do it all at once. We're going to just quickly run through the assignment of OTN3 today. It should be a very brief class. Before we do that, let's just remind ourselves of what your responsibilities are for the week, okay? General reminder, you need to remember that the AP exam is on May 20th, all right? Remember your new discussion grade procedure. You can question, summarize, or reflect on what was discussed during the class in your YouTube comment, all right? So it'll be very clear for those of you that are not listening carefully to these videos or interacting with the information that is very clearly available on RenWeb, that you're not doing that because you won't be leaving these kinds of comments, okay? So make sure that you are showing that you are up to date on keeping up with your work, all right? Today we're going to begin OTN3, which is available for download on RenWeb in the Lesson Plans tab. You can download a Word document form of this document right here, Hello Hudson Hall, all right? And then you need to make sure that you are completing the Unit 7 progress check, all right, by Wednesday. That's tomorrow for your AP students at 3 p.m. And beginning your Unit 8 progress check. If you're not in the AP course, you don't need to worry about that, all right? So contextualizing all this work is obviously your work on your Quarter 4 essay. You need to make sure that that is making its way from your back burner to your front burner. Remember, if you are particularly intrigued by any of these conversations that we're having in class, you are absolutely able to turn one of these into your formal essay, okay? Certainly wouldn't want you to not have that option. Now, do you have to do it? No, okay? I don't want to place that limitation on you. You can talk about whatever you're interested in. But are some of these topics inherently interesting? Sure. Are there sources ready and waiting for you to engage with? Yes, there certainly are, okay? Regardless, however you do this, you need to make sure you're producing a high-quality piece of work, coronavirus or not. Okay, frankly, that cannot continue to be an excuse for bad work. At this point, we've all adjusted, and this is simply how we're going to be operating until the end of the year. So we are going to do it well. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into looking at OTN3 quickly together, all right? So OTN3, the prompt reads as follows, all right? John Brown, who lived from 1800 to 1859, all right? So think antebellum America, early 19th century, all right? Was born into a deeply religious family in Connecticut and moved to Ohio when he was 5. He made his living variously as a farmer, tanner, and land speculator. And he fathered 6 children with his first wife, who died in childbirth, and 13 with his second. So the man was a fertile individual. He was always a committed abolitionist who, despite significant financial difficulties, contributed to anti-slavery causes, gave land to fugitive slaves, and participated in the Underground Railroad. Right? In his 50s, so when he was in the last decade of his life, he and 5 of his sons went to Kansas to fight pro-slavery forces. Now, so if you know your American history, you'll know that in the 1850s, there was a huge contention about whether or not Kansas should enter the Union as a free state or a slave state. Okay, that had political implications not only for Kansas, but for the nation as a whole, as it would disproportionately represent one of those important groups, all right? During what came to be known as the Potawatomi Massacre and the Battle of Osawatomie, Brown led attacks against proponents of slavery. Right? So this is a peacetime, and he is, taking upon himself to lead violent attacks on other Americans. When he retired from Kansas, he began raising money to support his plan to free slaves in Virginia. Right, on October 16th, 1859, this is what Brown is most famous for, at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, Brown led a raid on the federal arsenal. Okay, so there was a United States military arsenal at Harper's Ferry, and he and some of his sons and some other men that he was leading, all right, were attempting to steal those weapons, and then he was going to give them to slaves in Virginia and persuade them or inspire them or try to convince them somehow to rebel against their masters. All right, so he is caught. Many of his followers were killed or captured. Two of his sons were killed, and he was tried and hanged within a few months of the Harper's Ferry raid. Okay, so as you can imagine, this raid has always been controversial. Though the vast majority of contemporary Americans would agree with Brown's belief in the inherent equality of the races, or at least confess that outwardly, right? Nobody would say, nah, we should bring slavery back. That was a pretty good move, especially since I'm white, right? That would be very great for me. I would love to have some unpaid help. Since most Americans don't really talk that way, they don't really believe that, right? That those kinds of opinions are pretty marginal. The violent methods that he used to attempt to realize those beliefs in a peacetime, apart from a declared war, is often troubling. All right, so some characterize Brown as a hero whose acts of violence were a justified reaction to the enduring presence of institutionalized racism in America that helped catalyze a righteous war. So think of Brown as someone who would have heard the call in What's the Slaves of the 4th of July and done, according to his own lights, attempted to radically alter or abolish something that was a real injustice. Okay? Others, alternatively, would view him as a terrorist who took the law into his own hands during peacetime, leading to the unjustified deaths of 4 ordinary men who stood in his way. Okay, so the attack ends up killing or costing the lives of 4 people who were defending doing their duty in peace times. All right, and then 10 more who followed him to their deaths. Okay, so while the enduring question of Brown's innocence or guilt is inherently interesting to those who would value the study of history, it can seem unnecessary to those who do not. The skeptic might ask, what does John Brown, a man who died in 1859, have to do with me? Well, the answer is simple, and it has 2 parts. Number one, it is imperative for a community, a society, to identify those who they will memorialize as heroes, because heroes act as clear embodiments of their community's highest ideals, which offers a vital source of ethical unity that shapes a society or group's future by establishing standards for future generations to emulate. Okay, so in other words, memorializing someone, and this is part of the reason why the Confederate memorials were so contentious just a few years ago. All right, memorializing someone as a hero is not only an act of reflection on the past, oh, they were so heroic, but also of prophecy, a kind of prophetic self-identification, right, in which you say that person was honored by us. And therefore, if you would like also to be honored by us, then you ought to do something similar to this individual. All right. Now that oftentimes it doesn't mean literally. Okay. So like, don't literally wear a Lincoln-style top hat and get shot in a theater. Okay. But obviously, more generally, pursue the kinds of premises and principles that were at the foundation of Lincoln's policies and acts as a politician, despite the fact that those, as we who know history, were oftentimes complex and oftentimes riddled with compromises. Okay, so memorializing a person, it's not just for the past; it's also for the future. Okay. Reminds me of the statement from 1984, he who controls the past controls the future. Okay. Number 2, it's also imperative for a community to identify when violence is justified. Besides those who would identify as radical pacifists, in other words, never hurt anything ever, Most Americans would agree that violence is sometimes, emphasis on sometimes, permissible, but only under a special set of circumstances that justify it, okay? So like a just war, okay? If you support the death penalty, that is a permissible form of violence that is state executed, state mandated, and protected by the state's law, okay? So, if violence is sometimes permissible, that very vague ethical premise of it's permissible if it is justified it begs a very obvious question. What are those circumstances? Okay, so the answer to this question is the thin line between bloodshed, justified bloodshed, and aggravated murder. Okay, so the question that you are going to be exploring in the following 6 sources, all right, which will be another conversation. Which, by the way, might be your test prompt. All right, might not, but it very well could be. It has been in the past. All right, so you're going to use at least 4 of the sources that follow to write an essay that develops a stance on how John Brown should be memorialized. Okay, so once again, another kind of claim of policy that heavily relies on articulating and establishing value claims on which your policy is based. Okay, very similar to your claim in the Cordoba House case. Okay, so I hope you guys are doing well. That's all we have today. We're going to be spending some time, obviously, tomorrow talking more specifically about the role that each one of these sources plays. In this conversation, you'll have more time to work with these sources. All right, that's just kind of how this unit works. You work with the sources. We talk about the prompts. We connect them to the prompts. You write your outlines. We move forward. Eventually, we'll take a test. Obviously, the more prepared you are for that test, or your preparation for that test is going to reflect the extent to which you master both the concepts of synthesis and the actual documents in these conversations. Okay, so have an excellent day. Make sure that you submit your OTN2 outline promptly by 3 p.m. today.